I always thought high school, actually middle school, then high school.
No.
So
How'd
just
you
a quick,
have-
just a quick story. So when my son was in the second grade,
Yeah.
his teacher, because I did a lot with Native Americans.
Yeah.
So my son was in the second grade. She said, "Could you come down and do a little thing for 10, 15 minutes?" Well, I was always used to dealing with high school kids. Well, I went down, and there weren't two words out of my mouth. Every hand
I
was
know.
raised, and they're asking questions that have nothing to do with,
Yeah.
well, ooh, I forget. And they were up and down. They were tying shoes. I said, "Get me back to the high school. I'm exhausted." I don't know how you have the patience.
Yeah.
So anyhow, this is the 1831. It's the original one-room schoolhouse here in Mashpee. Mashpee is a Wampanoag district, the Wampanoag town, Native American. Those are the Native Americans that welcomed the Pilgrims into Plymouth back in 1620. They were here for more than 12,000 years. So this is one of the oldest buildings in Mashpee. And if you look around the rest of the Cape, Falmouth, the other towns, you say 1831. That really isn't that old. It may be old for Washington, but not in New England, because you have 1700.
Sure.
The reason is because we were a Wampanoag community, and the Wampanoags didn't build European English-style houses. They lived closer to the water and weed-toos in the summer, and then they moved inland into longhouses. So we don't have a lot of the structures you'll see in Falmouth or Sandwich or some of the other towns. So even though it's 1831, it actually is one of the oldest buildings here in Mashpee. And I'll give you the story of how it was saved. Before we go in, I just want to point out there's a shed attached, and originally this building has been moved twice.
Oh.
So originally it was down in South Mashpee.
Okay.
And I'll give you the story inside. And then it was moved up to the Old Indian Burial Ground, and then in 2008 it was moved here. And when they moved it the first time, the shed they didn't take with it. So 2 years ago, the high school students in Mashpee, by using photographs, getting the exact dimensions, they rebuilt the replica of the woodshed.
Yeah.
That was the woodshed that would have been attached to it. So for the first time in almost 100 years, we actually have the schoolhouse what it originally looked like. Yeah. So that was just done 2 years ago. Let me just give you a little spiel of the history of it, and then ask whatever questions you want. So up until 1831, Mashpee didn't have any schools at all. We were a Native American district under control of the state. And the Wampanoags kept petitioning the state, get us a school, we want to educate our kids. Because the only education at the time was taking place in individual homes. Petition after petition after petition. Finally, in 1831, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in its generosity, gives $400 to Mashpee to build two schools. One in the north end of town, one in the south end of town. So this is the south school that you're in. So just real quick, the north school was this one here, a little bigger than this. And it was originally located across the street where the brick town hall is. So that was the north school, and that serviced all the north end of town, and then this serviced the south end of town, South Cape Beach and all down by that way. Because naturally back then you had to walk when you went to school. So
Where is that now?
it was demolished, and I'll give you a little background, and then eventually the town hall was built. So just a real quick story. I've only been here 9 years in Mashpee. Originally I was from Midfield, which is a suburban town just outside Boston where I taught. And so when I retired, we decided to move down here to the Cape. And we actually originally looked on Eastham, and we lost on a bidding war in a house right on the National Seashore, which was nice. I'm really so glad we lost, because then the realtor said, we got some houses in Mashpee. They didn't know much about Mashpee. We were kids. We always went down to like Hyannis, Dennis Yarmouth, that area. So he showed us we actually got a house over here by Santua Pond. So I then got appointed to the Historical Commission here in town. So we were doing some research on something, and I said, well, where are the early town reports? Here in New England, every year they put out what's called an annual town report. Every department puts in what went on during the course of the year. They list all the teachers, they list salaries, everything is in the annual town report. So they said, well, Mashpee becomes a town in 1870, and they said, we've lost all the early town reports from 1870 to 1910.
Oh, no.
The town hall doesn't, we don't have the archives building over here, we don't have them. I said, what do you mean you don't have them? They're gone. So I said, well, I know from the research I did in Medfield that towns usually also have to send a copy into the State House. So I get on the phone, I called the State House Library, and they said, yeah, we got them. I said, great. So I want to come in and copy them. So they said, well, they're in fragile condition. You can't copy them, but if you come in with your phone, you can line up and take pictures. Yeah. 840 pages later, I'm there all day.
You are dedicated.
Well, I'm there all day lining it up. So my last name, De Sorger, is unusual. It has the capital S. It's Belgian in origin. And we knew from family history that my great-grandfather, John, when he was 19 years old, he came over here on a ship. He was an assistant carpenter on one of the ships. When they came into Boston, he jumped ship here in Boston. So I guess we're illegal here. He jumped ship in Boston, and then he eventually marries this Mary, last name Lee, of Connecticut. And they have one child, my grandfather, Louis Lee. So we knew that she was a teacher. And we also knew that when he was a carpenter, when he came over here, he built a lot of the three-deckers in Boston, and he finally got enough money, and he said, I want to bring my mother over from Belgium.
Sure.
So he brings the mother over, but the mother and the wife, Mary Lee, don't get along. We knew this part of the story, and Mary Lee said, either she goes or I go. And he says, I can't send my mother back. So she takes my 8-year-old grandfather, says, see you later. And she left. We thought she was a teacher, to Franklin, a nearby town, and taught. So I'm going through taking pictures of all the records.
Sure.
I'm not reading it, but I'm lining it up, and I see this DE capital S. We always thought we were the only DeSorgers in the United States from Belgium. And I look down, I see this Mary Lee DeSorger in Mashpee teaching in 1887.
Oh my
You can see
God.
M.L. DeSorger there. That we never knew from 1887 to 1890, she came down here and taught. My grandfather, who was 8, 9, and 10 years old, would have went to school with all Wampanoags. And Earl Mills, who was the former chief of the Wampanoag, said, there's a house right next to Town Hall over there, and he said, they always rented out a room for the teachers to stay in. So I'm guessing my great-grandmother and my grandfather would have stayed in that house right there. We never knew that. My father didn't know this. Why wouldn't his grandmother say, hey, when I taught down in Mashpee with Wampanoags, or his father, you remember stuff when you're 10. I went to school with all Wampanoags. I was down on the Cape. Nothing, not a word. We didn't know any of that. So it's just so bizarre of a story. So to finish, she taught here in the North School from 1887 to 1890, and in 1890 they tore down the school and they built a new, larger wooden school. Then she left and did go to Franklin, the nearby town from Medfield, where she taught. And just to finish the story, in 1900, the mother dies. And Mary Lee, who had been gone now 13 years, they didn't divorce, she just left, comes back, knocks on the door, I'm back, moved back in. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary together, and ended, talk about a weird family.
Oh my God. That's awesome. I still remember that story. 'Cause I was
So when they say, anyone new under the Cape, unless you're 30 generations, you're called a washershore, you're new. So when they say it, I say, wait a minute, I had my grandmother back here in 1887. So, and of course my wife is saying, why did we come to Mashpee? Ooh, the spirits brought us to Mashpee, and now I'm the schoolmaster of the school, and she was the teacher there. So anyhow, this is the North School they built, and then they built this, 1831, they built the South School, and it was located, I don't know if you're familiar with Mashpee, but we have all the Nantucket Sound down in the bottom. So this school was located right on the corner of Red Brook Road and Great Oak, right down towards the Beachway. And it stays a school until 1900. And as you can see, this was the last class to attend the school in 1900. And it was kind of a mixed school, meaning that all ages went to school because the numbers were so small. So you had Clinton Haynes and Beatrice DeGrasse were just 5 years old. and the oldest was Blanche Pocknett. She was 14. After 14, you were done. There was no high school. So all the grades. So if the teacher was working with one kid, the older kid would help another kid, that type of thing. In 1900, because it's so small, they said we need a larger school. So Mashpee goes to our town meetings, which we have here, and the town votes $1,000 to build a bigger school. But then the town of Sandwich, which is right on our border, town of Sandwich says, we have a school that we've shut down, we don't use anymore, we'll sell it to you for $200. So Mashpee said, great, good savings. So they actually got the Sandwich School, put it on logs with oxen, and dragged all the way from up here, all the way through, and they put it across the street from this school. Here is it. So here's the Sandwich School. You can see much larger. Again, this is this school when it used to be down in South Mashpee, and you can see it had the woodshed back then before it was moved. So, and they began buying up a ton of land, including the land that this school was on. Now the good thing is they use it to store fertilizer in for all the golf courses. So you may say, why is that a good thing? Because they kept putting new roofs on to keep the fertilizer dry.
Yeah.
So it kind of preserved the building. So then by 1975, 76, during our bicentennial year, they're wanting it off the property. They're looking to develop more, and they said to the town, do you want it? The town said, well, yeah, it's one of the oldest buildings. And it really began to deteriorate. Raccoons got inside, the ants ate the sills. It was, you can see pictures back here. We were gonna lose it. It was all caved in, and so led by the Women's Club of Mashpee, they raised $50,000. The town puts in under the Community Preservation Act another $30,000. We hire a preservationist. Actually, he started out first trying to get rid of the raccoons and stuff that were in here. And then he basically worked for nothing. It was like a labor of love for this guy. And everything that was replaced, they wanted to make sure it came from the same time period of the 1830s. So he scoured all over New England into barns up in Vermont and other places. So for example, you can see an original beam that has the, if you look up there, the posts, the pegs coming through,
Yeah.
versus a reconstructed one they found up in Vermont
Right.
that doesn't have it coming through. A lot of the floorboards you see are original, others are replacements that were in there. But he worked on this from 1999 into 2003. And you can see the end result of it here. They then, some of the high school kids, we have what's called a senior project, where most of the kids by spring have already been accepted into college somewhere. And I know as a teacher that taught seniors, it's like containment, the last couple of months. So what a lot of schools have is a senior project where they come up with some type of a project they're going to work on, and then they independently work on that. Well, this one kid here came out with the project to build all these desks. Wow. So he built the school desk that you're sitting at right now. And we modeled them after some schools that they investigated out, actually in Ohio, of the format of that. So he built the desks that were here, and then they began to develop this here. This is the old Mashpee Center area here, and this was all woods, and they began to clear it out, and they put a veterans garden over there. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So they decided to move this down here. So in 2008, they moved it from the old Indian burial ground down to where it is here today. And it's been open to the public ever since. We're open all summer. We have all the third graders come through. As I said, we're having them come through now. So that's just a little bit of the history of that. With the kids, you might be interested as a kindergarten teacher. So I have the kids come in, and we tell them we're putting like in a time capsule, and they're coming back into the 1830s, 1840s. And I tell them, well, the teachers were very strict. They weren't mean, but they were strict. We have some of the rules that they had at the time. So, for example, my job as schoolmaster, one of the first things I had to inspect their neck, their ears, and their fingernails, make sure they were clean. If they weren't, they were sent home. The other thing I tell them, if you look, the school year went from October until June, and they went from 9 in the morning to 4. So I say to them, you know, you guys start in September, same in Washington,
Yeah.
right? Why did they not start until October back then? Well, finally they get, well, the farmers, they needed to do the harvesting. Here were the beans, the corn, and the squash were the main. So school didn't start till October. They about the same number of days, but they didn't have the vacations like Christmas, and we have a Washington's birthday vacation and an April vacation. They didn't have those. So they went to school from, as I said, from 9 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. But I said to the kids, look, even in the warm weather of June, can you see any of their arms or legs or ankles? You can't, because back then they thought it was improper for kids to come to school to see ankles or skin of any kind. So even the warm days, they had the long pants or they had the tall, you know, the socks pulled up that were there. So if you could see any skin, they were sent home. At 10 minutes of 9, my job as a schoolmaster would be to give a 10-minute warning, and I would ring the bell and give a 10-minute warning to let them know, because for every 5 minutes they were late for school, they had to stay after an hour with me. So I tell the kids, if you heard that, you're running as fast as you get. You don't want to sit here with me after school, and your parents are not going to be happy campers when they get home. Just some of the other rules they had. They couldn't talk unless the teacher spoke first. Are either one of you left-handed? You are. Well, as you probably know, back then, they wouldn't let you write with your left hand. They would whack you and force you to write with your right hand. My father was left-handed. He went to the Boston public schools, and they forced him to write with his right. He had horrible penmanship because he was left-handed, you know? So you get whacked. You'd have to write with your right hand. If you threw anything in class, you got 5 whacks with the rod. If you spit, you got 7. If you swore, you were suspended. If you carved anything on your desk or the walls, you were expelled. So when the kids come in, a lot of them, if they're observant enough, say, wait a minute, I see some carvings on the wall up here. There's some letters of the alphabet. There's some sailboats. There's some kites. And I said, well, remember I told you that after 1901, this becomes the property of the Baptist Church. So we're guessing that carving was done when the Baptist kids were here. And any fighting, lying, cheating, you were expelled. So the rules were strict. I like, you get this as a teacher, some of the rules of the teachers. Men teachers, I could take one evening, one each week for courting purposes, or 2 evenings a week if I went to church regularly. After 10 hours of schoolwork, the teacher may spend the remaining time reading the Bible or other good books. Women teachers who married lost their job.
Yeah.
That was true right up until World War II, when suddenly they needed the teachers, and suddenly they changed the rules. Any teacher who smoked, used liquor in any form, who got shaved in the barber shop, could be suspended. Teachers who performed their labor faithfully without any fault after 5 years would be given an increase of 25 cents per week in his pay, provided it was approved by the Board of Education. No unions then. So the rules were strict. Desk or the walls, you were expelled. So when the kids come in, a lot of them, if they're observant enough, say, wait a minute, I see some carvings on the wall up here. There's some letters of the alphabet. There's some sailboats. There's some kites. And I said, well, remember I told you that after 1901, this becomes the property of the Baptist Church. So we're guessing that carving was done when the Baptist kids were here. And any fighting, lying, cheating, you were expelled. So the rules were strict. I like, how is this different than your school in the Quashnet elementary school? And of course they talk about the ceilings and the beams, and I say, well, how is it heated? Do you see any radiators and stuff? You don't. So originally, if you want to come back here, you can see, I'm sorry, it's kind of blocked. Originally they would have had, and we can tell because of the location of the chimney, right where you're standing, there would have been like a potbelly stove originally. And then after the Baptists came in, they didn't want the stove in the middle. So what they did is they moved it to the outer wall, and that became a chimney and a stove there. When they did the restoration, just so people would know, they put this back here. So this is a small wood-burning stove. You can see that's up here. And the shed, the wood shed, we needed, because that's where your wood would have been stored. November, December, January, February, March, gets cold here, we need to heat the building. So it would have all been done by wood. You get here early on those cold mornings, get a good fire going, so when the kids came in, it would be warm. Then, of course, I say to them, it's getting kind of dark in here, let me turn the light on. There's no light. Well, they would have used what I call a hurricane lantern. Sure. And because we're on the Cape, whaling was real big, especially here in Mashpee. A lot of Mashpee people were whalers, and they would be gone. I don't know if you have time, but the Wampanoag Museum, I don't know if you've seen that up there. Yeah, they have a great thing on the whaling. The number of Mashpee people that were whalers, and they would be gone for a year or more, on these out to the South Pacific and everything else. Well, one of the things, of course, is the whale oil. And so you would have had the whale oil until kerosene comes in, which is cheaper, and that kind of does in the whaling business. So we would have had these lanterns, and we're guessing probably they would have been mounted on the wall right around. And here in New England, in December, January, February, by 3 o'clock, it's getting dark. So they would have probably, especially on a snowy or cloudy day, wouldn't give a lot of light off, but you get a little more. You do have 4 windows that are in here. Then I say to the kids, are there any bathrooms in here? Oh, no, there's none. Where would you? So eventually they guess you'd have some type of an outhouse. Now we know that there was an outhouse with the South School because in the 1882 town report, it reports that the town spent $2.87 repairing the South School outhouse. So we know there was an outhouse with the South School that was there. And then lunch, there's no lunchroom here. Kids would have either eaten outside in good weather, or they would have eaten, at their desks at weather that it was not good. And then, which is the highlight with the kids, I say, are there any computers on your desk? Oh, no. I said, this would have been, the quill, pens, and ink. Have you guys see how well you do. So I tell them, here on the Cape, what type of bird do you think the feathers would have come from? And eventually they guess probably seagull feathers. And if you want to give it a try here, some ink. The kids do pretty well, actually. I tell them my job as schoolmaster would be to sharpen these. If you look at the very bottom, it's very sharp. And I tell them the hollow part always has to face down. Okay. And I tell them if you dip in too deep, you go to right, you're going to make a big blob on the paper. Okay. If you don't go in deep enough, you're not going to get any ink. And then, as you can do, you can see the practice writing your name. Actually, the kids do pretty well.
Oh, they got too much.
Yeah, that's okay. She didn't get enough.
Hey, we put them together, we'd have enough.
So I tell them, is this easy or hard? And eventually they say, this is real hard. And I said, well, what if you had to write a 10-page paper or something? And I say, look at, we're celebrating on the 4th of July, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Yeah. That was written by quill, pen, and ink.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I say to them, what if you make a mistake? Can you go delete? Yeah. There's no white out. What you write is what you get. There you go. You got it. But they have fun with this. And then of course I tell them the other thing. All their math work and stuff would have been done on the slate boards. Very few books back then. What few books they had would be shared. And so every kid had to have what's called a copybook. They would copy everything into their copybook, both at home and here at school. And the books all would be shared. When we go out back, I'll show you some of the early books that still have the bark from the tree on the outside of the covers to that. There were two ministers, this Reverend Gideon Hawley and Phineas Fish, who were not very good to the Wampanoags. They're supposed to be meeting the spiritual needs of the Wampanoags, and unfortunately, most of the time they were meeting the needs of the whites. So this Phineas Fish, he basically expels the Wampanoag out of their own meeting house, and he begins preaching to the whites from Falmouth and Barnstable in their meeting house. So they're basically locked out of the meeting house. There's another great story now in the back. I'll show you the picture. So that you may have heard of, he's in a lot of the history books. His name is William Apis. And William Apis is a Methodist, he's a Native American Pequot from Connecticut. And he becomes, he gets tied in with the Methodist church and becomes a Methodist minister. And I tell the school kids, I said, William Apis would be equal to the Native Americans that Martin Luther King would be to African Americans. So he's into really the Native American rights. And he's traveling all over New England for Native American rights. And he goes into Boston and he meets with William Lloyd Garrison, the famous with the abolitionist movement. And he begins to hear stories about mistreatment and stuff down here in Mashpee. So he comes down to Mashpee and he meets up with Blind Joe Amos, and he preaches here in this schoolhouse as well. And after being down here for several months, he says, this is crazy. You guys need to declare your independence. So they draw up, which you can read up there, basically what is called a Declaration of Independence in April of 1833. And they said it's going to go into effect July the 1st. And we're only asking three things. One is that we will govern ourselves. Two, all decisions made of our natural resources, the hay fields, the timber, the fishing rights, the shellfish, we will decide. And three, we want our meeting house back. And it's going to start July 1. So come July 1, and they notified neighboring towns, they notified the governor, everyone else. Come July 1, several farmers from Barnstable come in and start cutting wood down. William Apis and a group of Wampanoags say, not happening. They take all the wood out of the wagon, send them back to Barnstable. The ministers get word of this, get word to the governor that the Wampanoags are in revolt. The governor says he's going to send down 1,500 armed troops, which is ludicrous, because we only have a population of 340 with old hunting weapons. Luckily, calmer heads prevail. But he does send down a negotiator, this guy Joshua Fiske, F-I-S-K-E, and he negotiates, and he meets with the Wampanoags over in the meeting house and says, look, do away with your Declaration of Independence. I'll go back to the legislature, work with them to give you your autonomy back again. I think if I was a Wampanoag, I would have said, hey, we've been cheated enough, but they said, okay, we'll go along with you. And sure enough, he goes back, works with the legislature, and under the Acts of 1834, Mashpee again gets its autonomy with 3 overseers, all elected. Basically what we have in New England here called select board members or selectmen that are here. So now they have control again. William Apis was arrested for causing a revolt. He took the wood out of the wagon. He served 30 days in jail, had to pay a fine. With that. But that Declaration of Independence was signed by 102 Wampanoags in this schoolhouse. So this is kind of like our Independence Hall, if you think about it, for Wampanoags. During the course of the day, 102 signed. So not only do we have Mashpee history, but you have the Wampanoag history with the ministers preaching here and this Declaration of Independence signed within these 4 walls, that are here. They now have autonomy again, and with that, the land was all mutually owned, and the state said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to divide everything up, and we're going to give every Wampanoag 60 acres of land, and that's going to divide it up. So, but the land can only be sold to another Wampanoag. It cannot be sold outside of Mashpee with that. So that takes place, that land. So now as we get from the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, this becomes the only place in Massachusetts that's not a town. It's still a Native American district. And there's pressure to make this a town. Well, for the Wampanoags, it means a couple of things. One, they weren't citizens, as ironic as that sounded, they're the oldest people here, but they weren't American citizens, so they could not vote. But they didn't have to pay taxes. So they kind of like that. And if they became a town, that provision that land could only be sold to another Wampanoag would be out the window. They can sell it whoever you wanted to. And they kind of think, well, if we did that, they were land rich, but they were poor financially. And you had a lot of wealthy people who would love to spend money and buy up all this land. So they had to debate that. So there was pressure on the town, and the legislature decided to have a hearing whether or not to incorporate Mashpee as a town. So they had hearings down here in Mashpee. And on the question of whether or not you want to become a town and give up that provision of only selling land was defeated on the vote. And the question of becoming a citizen and starting to pay taxes again was an even tie. So with that, the general thing, there was no positive vote taken by the Wampanoags. But when we went back to the legislature decided they're becoming a town. Mm-hmm. And so in 1870, Mashpee becomes a town here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In some of the early spellings, and you see it up here on the map, we had an R in the name. So it's M-A-R-S-H-P-E, like Mashpee. Mm-hmm. But when they officially became a town, the state dropped the R with that. Now, of course, my wife says it's because of the Boston accent, but that's not true. So we are now M-A-S-H-P-E-E. Some of the early maps, you'll see it with the R, sometimes with, sometimes without. So, and then, which many people had predicted, within 20 years, the majority of land owned was by people outside of Mashpee. Yeah, and it stays that way right up until almost the 1970s. The population here was under 1,000. We were around 800. Today it's 15,000. So we're the only town that doesn't have a train track to come through it. And Mashpee missed a lot of the tourist boom that the rest of the Cape got. But by the early 70s, now this is like this oasis of land that's here. And up until then, there was a lot of summer people that came here, but the Wampanoags didn't mind because they worked with them, they gave them some employment, and then in the winter they were gone, so they still ran the government. All the town offices, everything, were all elected, were all Wampanoags. But by the early 70s, now people begin staying here year-round. And pretty soon, the population of the non-Wampanoag exceeded that of the Wampanoag. And suddenly, Mashpee becomes, at one point, the fastest growing town in the country. It explodes into the 70s and 80s. Building permits were being whipped out left and right. And so the Wampanoags that always used to go down this path to go hunting or fishing, suddenly there was houses there and fences and private property signs. And so what happened in the late 70s that you may have heard of, Mashpee says, wait a minute, we have treaties that go all the way back into the 1600s that say land cannot be taken away from us unless we have an agreement with us and an agreement by the state legislature, neither of which was ever done. So we want all undeveloped land now to be ours. And they take it to court. It becomes known as the land court decision. And it went all the way, eventually all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And you can probably guess they lost because they ruled that they were not a continuous tribe, which is ludicrous because, again, these are the people that welcomed the Pilgrims that have been here ever since, been here for 12,000 years and continue to be here. But they ruled that they were not a continuous tribe at certain points during the history, and so they lost on that land suit. And tensions here in the town, this is before I came here, but tensions were really bad between the animosity between the two, and it really divided the town. And as I said, I moved in just 9 years ago, and I think things are getting much better because the town, 7 years ago, just elected another Wampanoag to the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board. And then this past election before cycle, we elected a second Wampanoag to the Select Board as well. So there's still, I think, a mistrust that's out there, but it's much better than it was. So what's happening now in Mashpee, they have brought back the Wampanoag language. It's actually taught in the schools. As a high school kid, you can take Spanish, French, or Wampanoag.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've brought the language because up until like till the 50s, many were prohibited from even speaking their language. And so it became a dead language that no one could remember. And they did a great job going back through old documents and others that they were able to a rebirth of the language, and now is spoken. If you go like at our different meetings, and Wampanoags will always at first introduce themselves in Wampanoag first, and then go right into English. But yeah, so they're so once starting in with the Biden administration, the Wampanoags received what was called land in trust by the Secretary of the Interior, meaning that they had land that it was in trust, it was theirs. And the town of Mashpee, for like $1, voted several parcels of land that they sold. Well, it was theirs originally, but they got their land back. And down on Great Neck South, there is the Wampanoag Government Center, which is a beautiful building. It's actually in the shape of a turtle, if you look at it. Which, yeah, the ceiling, which is in the early, the sea was all water and the turtle came in. There's a whole story that goes with that. But it's a beautiful facility. They have their own police force, their government force, their courts. And where the Wampanoag Museum is up here, that's Wampanoag land. And down by the old Indian Meeting House, all the cemetery now, the town voted to turn that over. That's also Wampanoag. And there's a development just before it, that's a Wampanoag housing that's in there. And they had like a lottery. There's about 40 or 50 units housing, really nice houses that are in there. So it's kind of like a checkerboard, but they have a series of land. But the Wampanoags used to control all of southeastern Massachusetts, part of Rhode Island, and all of Cape Cod. And so they also owned land in this town off Cape called Taunton. And the Wampanoags here have. And so they wanted to put a casino into Taunton. And there was a lot of battle with that. But they've just opened it's not a full-fledged casino, but they have slot machines and other things in Taunton. So they're getting some income that's coming from there as well. They have their own schooling. Kids go to school here in Mashpee, but they also do daycare and other schooling where they're taught, the language, everything else, the customs, tribal customs and stuff. So, they have this kind of land in trust. So
are they a sovereign nation?
They are in that sense, yes.
Okay.
They are citizens of Mashpee, but they are also citizens of the Wampanoag Nation. And their territory, they have total control. As I said, if a crime is committed on that property, arrested by a Wampanoag police officer, they go to the Wampanoag court. If it's out, we work back and forth, the town, police, and fire with, they don't have their own fire. We use if there's a fire on their property, the Mashpee Fire Department would respond. You have mutual aid, as many towns do, like Sandwich and Mashpee and others, very similar, but they are a sovereign nation. Starting in 1763, they have some freedom and rights, and now they control the fishing rights and the hay and the timber and all that, not being leased out to whites by the overseers. So they're feeling pretty good at this point. Then, as you know, 250 years ago, the revolution breaks out, and I'll show you if you have time outside, but Mashpee responds at a higher percent to the Patriot cause than any other town here on Cape Cod. Just to give you some statistics, the colonies of Massachusetts and Connecticut had the highest numbers that went into the Continental Army, 1 out of every 7 of population. Mashpee has 1 out of every 5. Sandwich is full of Tories, so is Nantucket. You don't see that here. And so people would ask me, why is the patriotism so strong here, not so much in neighboring towns? So my argument used to be, well, they had freedom for the first time. They enjoyed that. They are looking at this new United States saying all people are created equal, this new Constitution, Declaration of Independence, we're going to make out much better under this new United States than we are under England, and that's the reason. But I had one of the Wampanoags, local Wampanoags that is on the commission with me say, you know, what you need to understand is a Wampanoag male is a warrior, and he's taught from the youngest age to defend all that is sacred. His home, his tribe, his family, and so now, being endangered, they would have gone off to fight. So I said, okay. So they went off, because the population was only around 340, but we had 67 that go off. And over here in what's called Veterans Garden, 15 of the Wampanoags never come home. They're killed in battle. So we have and if you have time, I'll walk you over there. We have an honor stone for each one. We were able to research and find out each of those. So Mashpee plays a tremendous toll fighting this Revolutionary War.